Welcome back to First Christian Church Sunday School. Today we are going to be getting into Genesis. We're looking at chapters 26 through 28, a part of 28. Last week, just to kind of remind you, our lesson was on the birth of Jacob and Esau, the twins that were sons of Isaac and his wife, Rebekah. And we saw as they grew up, Esau was born first, Jacob second. But there was a prophecy that the younger would rule over the older, which was unusual for that time, since the older one usually got the birthright and that type of thing. And we actually saw Esau sell his birthright right for a bowl of soup, or stew, I guess. So the story picks up here where we have a famine that has hit the land, and Isaac and Rebekah relocate to southwest Israel where the Philistines live. And God made a similar promise to Isaac that he had to Abraham. Now, remember, Abraham and Sarah are both dead at this point in time, and he told Isaac that his ancestors would be as many as the stars, just like God had told Abraham that. And he reaffirms that promise to Isaac. And the story tells us that he meets King Abimelech there from the Philistines. And when the king asked Isaac about the woman who was with, the king said, or his wife's name being Rebekah, Isaac followed his dad's lead here and said, "Oh, she's my sister," when really she was his wife. And Isaac was scared, just like Abraham had been scared, that because his wife was so beautiful that they might harm him. And so he told him that his wife Rebekah was a sister, and that ultimately, I think the king found out that Isaac was lying about that and really got on Isaac about it and said, "Why did you lie to us? That could have got us into some real trouble there." And anyway, they worked it out, and ultimately Abimelech gave him Isaac some peace tribute, so to speak, and and then it turned out that Isaac was prospering his livestock over time, and his crops were growing real well, and he was becoming real powerful. And Abimelech and the Philistines didn't like that, and they asked Isaac to leave, Isaac and Rebekah. And so they did. They relocated and started. Of course, one of the things you got to do out in the desert, you got to dig a well and get water. And he did, and there was some dispute between the Philistines where Isaac had relocated in that well. So he moved and dug another one, and there was another dispute. And Isaac finally moved to a different place near Beersheba, a city, and dug a well there, and there was no dispute. And that's why that city is named Beersheba. And it's a very, we know where that city is today. We can see it on the map. It's at the lower end of Israel. And so Isaac and his two sons start growing up, Jacob and Esau. We know that Esau is a hunter and gatherer, and Jacob stays more at home and does more home type stuff. And Isaac is getting pretty old at this point in time. He can't see very well at all. And it was coming time for Isaac to give his birthright, his promise, his blessing to Esau, since he was the oldest. And he told Esau, "Go out and hunt something and get some game for me to eat, and I'll give you the blessing." So Esau does. Well, Rebekah, who really favored Jacob over Esau, heard this, and she said, "Quick, Jacob, let's go get some of the goats out in the backyard, and let's kill them and cook them up for your father, and use the hair, their skins, and put it on your arms, and I want you to pretend like you're Esau and go get the birthright." And Jacob's like, "That doesn't seem right." And Rebekah's like, "Just do what I say, all right?" And Jacob did. So they cooked up the goat and put it on his neck and on his arms, the hair of the animals. So and he went in to his father Isaac and pretended to be Esau. And Isaac, he recognized that the voices were different and kept asking, are you sure you're Esau? And he's like, yeah. And he said, let me touch your arms. And he did. And he felt the hair on his arms and then touched his neck. And eventually Isaac was convinced that, okay, you must be Esau. And he went ahead and gave him the blessing. And the blessing went, may God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of the grain and wine. Let people serve you and the nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be anyone who curses you, and blessed be anyone who blesses you. And so Jacob got the blessing, and he left the room, and no sooner did he leave, here comes Esau with the game and gives it to his father and says, go ahead and give me my blessing. And Isaac's like, what do you mean? You were just here a few minutes ago. And he goes, no, I wasn't. And then Isaac's like, oh no, I've been fooled, and just hollers out. And Esau says, well, give me the blessing. You can take it back and change it. But for some reason, it was their culture back then that you couldn't do that. Once the blessing was given, that was it. And Isaac told Esau, I have no blessing to give you. I've given it to your brother Jacob. And of course, Esau was really upset, and justifiably so, at his brother. And ultimately, I think he wanted to harm his brother, and Rebekah found out about it. And so she warned Jacob, you got to get out of town. And so Jacob does. He heads out. And I think Esau kind of knew his mother was in on it, because he started marrying women that weren't from their tribe, but from the Canaanites, which didn't believe the same way they did, and that caused a lot of conflict between the family, between Isaac, Rebekah, and Esau, and his wives. And so Esau got pretty upset with that, and but Jacob got away with the blessing and ultimately the inheritance. When you get the blessing, you get a lot of the things that your father owns, a lot of the animals and crops and food and that type of thing, and supplies. That all went to Jacob, and he went to go live with his uncle Laban, and we'll learn more about his time with Laban next week. That was Rebekah's brother, and got a little bit of a love story next week that you will get to hear. And this lesson's a little tough because it feels like the cheaters won, that Jacob cheated and he won. And it's a kind of a bitter pill to swallow, when you're going through this Bible, because you want the right to prevail. Not that Esau was on the side of right either, because, he sold his birthright for a bowl of stew. So, it's one of those things, it's kind of hard to cheer for either side, but it's amazing what good God can do, even with people who don't always do what's right. Jacob, this wasn't the only time he had been a little mischievous. And yet we're going to learn that God's going to use him to do great things and to accomplish wonderful things, and that he's going to be the father of the, of 12 tribes that are going to come later. And so you kind of have to stay tuned, because next week we're going to talk about a dream that Jacob has, that it's one of a lot of people's favorite chapters in the Bible. So we'll go through that. Now, going to the workbook, we ended on page 97 last week, and this week we're going to start with page 98, and they're going to have you circle, identify several verses in a particular book and chapter, and see if you can circle them all, so you can get more used to identifying a book, a chapter, and a verse, several verses in that. So I'll have you go through page 101. With the workbook, page 98 through 101, finding your way through the Bible. So I hope you have a wonderful week, and may God bless you and keep you.